Hours ago, Russia lifted the moratorium on strikes against Ukrainian energy. Putin proposes to establish international governance in Ukraine under the leadership of the EU. Global companies are lifting sanctions and returning to Russia. UEFA wants to bring Russia back into major football. And which sanctions are helping Ukraine at the negotiation table? Watch all this in this episode of Hell's Point. Urgently, for those who had hopes for a truce, there is bad news for you. Russia has violated the moratorium on strikes against energy infrastructure, almost immediately after agreeing on it with the USA. An oil and gas facility was attacked last night. What will be the reaction of the USA and the international community? Find out in this report.
All these loud words are indeed just simply playing merely to the gallery.
An order for the full-fledged commander. It is also for the full-fledged commander, and the Russian armed forces are maintaining this period from strikes on Hull, Ukraine's energy structure, in accordance with the agreement that was reached between Russia and the USSR.
Nevertheless, we are demonstrating that we strictly adhere to the letter of this truce.
The Kremlin does not want to stop the war? The Russian Federation is increasing the number of drone crews to boost launches and is already preparing new sites.
According to RBC Ukraine, Russia has already opened 3 more new sites for launching UAVs. All are in the Primorsko-Akhtarsk area, in addition to the already 7 functioning ones. This could allow the aggressor to increase the number of drones launched during a single attack, that is, in one day or night.
The emergence of new launch sites once again proves that the Kremlin has decided to intensify pressure on the global community and the Ukrainian government by increasing shelling. Putin does not want a ceasefire. This is written by Andriy Kovalenko, head of the Center for Countering Disinformation at the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine.
This is how Russia wants a ceasefire and peace. They plan to increase terror against civilians.
I hear something fly. I shout to my people, drone! Get down. I'm not in a hurry to close the door. Explosion. Blaze. Explosion. A cloud of smoke. A cloud of everything.
The aggressor Ukraine continues every night, terrorizing Ukrainian cities. The video shows another massive attack by Russian drones. This time the target was the city of Dnipro. In addition, about 12 kamikaze drones attacked the city of Kharkiv. Russia struck Zaporizhzhia with several dozen drones at once. Earlier, similar massive shelling was carried out on Odessa and Kropivnitsky. Thank you. Russia has begun using them in the war against Ukraine. Iranian-made Shahed drones have been used since 2022. Russian engineers have undertaken modifications, naming them Goran 1 and Goran 2.
Good Iranian partners taught how to make drones from lawnmowers. Jiran. Even so, I don't care what they are called, whether by the beautiful Arabic word Shahed or the beautiful Russian word Geran, as long as they fly and fall on heads.
Ah, what garrants in Odessa? Blooming over the headquarters. Tearing even the Banderas threads. That's an answer. Better than 1,000 words.
These drones maneuver at different altitudes, sometimes flying too high, sometimes too low, causing them to disappear from radars. At night, the Russians can launch from 100 to 200 such UAVs. The Kremlin pays Iran over $5 billion a year for the import of Iranian drones. A single kamikaze drone costs from 12 to 20 million rubles. The Primorsko-Akhtarsk airfield is an important military base used by Russia for launching drones and aviation. And this is what the city of Primorsko-Akhtarsk looks like in the Krasnodar Krai of the Russian Federation. The city, with a population of 30,000, is not developing. Meanwhile, instead of investing money in the infrastructure of its regions, the Kremlin spends blood-stained rubles on 3 new sites for launching UAVs. The Primorsko-Akhtarsk airfield was attacked by Ukrainian UAVs on the night of February 6, 2025. A fire broke out there.
This is not for my shots. This is after your work.
Yes! As of 2025, the Russian Federation systematically uses Shahed drones to strike critical infrastructure and cities in Ukraine, launching them from Milerovo, Shatalovo, Oryol, Primorsko-Akhtarsk, and Kursk. Ukraine's air defense already has significant experience in destroying Shahed drones. However, the increase in the number of launch sites presents new challenges. Will this affect the intensity of attacks in the coming months? Time will tell. But the defense forces of Ukraine are ready for this. And Russia is a terrorist country.
Putin proposes to introduce temporary administration in Ukraine under the leadership of the EU. He also threatens to eliminate all Ukrainians, change the government in Ukraine, and only then negotiate peace. Other shocking statements from the Kremlin dictator. Watch right now.
A new batch of absurd statements from the Kremlin schizoid was published by Russian propaganda media during his communication with the submariners of the nuclear submarine cruiser, Arkhangelsk. He expressed the opinion that Russia is persistently and confidently moving towards achieving all the goals stated at the beginning of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And he said that there are grounds to believe, quote, that we will achieve them.
And today, along the entire line of combat confrontation, our military has strategic initiative. And there are all the reasons to believe, as I have long said, we will press them. You can believe today that we will press them.
At the same time, Putin did not miss the opportunity to ingratiate himself with the President of the United States, Trump. The dictator stated that the occupant of the White House sincerely wants to end the war in Ukraine. Putin also brazenly suggested establishing an international administration in Ukraine under the auspices of the UN and several countries to conduct elections. The dictator stated that he wants to bring a new government to power in Ukraine, and then start negotiations for a peace treaty with them and sign legitimate documents that will be recognized worldwide and be reliable.
The international community decided that the war was over. Russia is waiting for the lifting of sanctions, economic pressure is easing, foreign companies are returning to Russia, and UEFA is exploring the possibilities of bringing Russia back into major football. Watch the details right now.
The Russian Federation is seriously suffering economically due to the invasion of Ukraine, and that is why it demands the lifting of sanctions on the supply of its agricultural products through the Black Sea. Moreover, some countries in the West seem ready to make this concession for the sake of a ceasefire. Primarily in Washington. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio told American journalists that during recent negotiations in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, Moscow said, conditions regarding the cessation of strikes on Ukraine's energy sector and military actions in the Black Sea. One of the demands is precisely the lifting of sanctions. According to the Secretary of State, the EU should join this process and consider how to ease economic restrictions on the aggressor for the sake of a truce. Meanwhile, Russia is already anticipating the lifting of sanctions from the Agricultural Bank, the restoration of access to SWIFT, and the unblocking of agricultural exports by the United States. This was stated by the spokesperson of the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Maria Zakharova. The fact that economic pressure on the aggressor has begun to weaken is also evidenced by the fact that a company, which left Russia due to the full-scale invasion, has returned to the country for the first time. Specifically, an Italian manufacturer of water heaters and heating equipment announced the resumption of operations in Russia. And not only that, it seems that Russia is about to be reinstated in major football and allowed to participate in European and World Championships. Specifically, according to The Independent, UEFA is exploring the possibility of Russia's return to international football tournaments. According to the source of the publication, certain influential figures in European football are advocating for the lifting of the suspension, considering it unfounded. Amid the potential truce in Ukraine, a plan is being developed to reintegrate Russian teams into competitions. The International Olympic Committee has already been involved in the process. The issue of the return of Russian teams may be discussed at the UEFA Congress, scheduled for April 3rd in Belgrade. The Kremlin should definitely not relax. The United States may still radically change its stance. regarding the sanctions policy against Russia. Everything will depend on how the truce in Ukraine proceeds. Yes, US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent stated on the American TV channel Fox News that decisions will need to be made regarding the next steps towards Russia, whether sanctions will be strengthened or weakened. The final word will be up to Trump, added the US Treasury Secretary. In Europe, there is its own opinion, and now Brussels has put forward the main condition for lifting sanctions on Russia. The European Union officially stated that any easing or lifting of sanctions against Russia will only be possible after the complete withdrawal of Russian troops from the entire territory of Ukraine. Moreover, the EU has, on the contrary, now strengthened sanctions against Moscow. Specifically, from March 26th, EU countries' ports are prohibited from providing transshipment services for liquefied natural gas produced by Russia. Additionally, the provision of technical support, brokerage services, financing or financial support for transshipment is also prohibited. Therefore, it's still too early for Putin to celebrate.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Why do international sanctions specifically help Ukraine at the negotiation table? And why do Russians, whenever possible, make the lifting of sanctions their main condition in any negotiations? How effective are they? And how do they affect the Russian economy? Watch right now.
Half of small and medium-sized businesses in Russia have faced a drop in sales. The business activity index literally collapsed because Russia entered 2025 with a huge budget deficit.
Simply put, if we continue to work like this, then we will. Practically most enterprises will go bankrupt. Such. I unfortunately do not know of any business with profitability over 20%. Maybe there are some like drug trafficking or something else, but even arms trading does not provide such faith.
27 billion US dollars. Oh, this is simply a deficit that needs to be covered by something. To cover it by something means that resources that would have been directed towards economic development need to be redirected to cover this. Accordingly, development will be less, less production of certain goods and fewer services will be provided.
Speaking to industrialists, Putin stated that the war will continue and businesses need to adapt to the new reality.
Everything is stalling, all these negotiations, in fact, are not needed by anyone. Obviously, I've said this many times before, it won't be like it was before. Full freedom of trade, payments, and capital flows, for instance, is not feasible.
Even Russian economists are talking about major problems. Prices are rising every day, people are buying less, and productions are shutting down.
The price increase has accelerated for goods heavily dependent on the exchange rate, primarily for electronics and household appliances. We entered this year at a very high point, meaning with very high rates of price growth. Annual inflation will have a long breaking path due to strong inertia, and overall prices will rise by 7 to 8% this year.
The problem is that Russia has large high costs for conducting the war and simultaneously faces difficulties. External economic activities and the purchase of key goods for its economy.
Literally every month of last year, the Central Bank of Russia raised the key rate, but for several months now it has remained at the same level while inflation is rising.
Today, as part of our detailed and thorough comprehensive analysis, we decided to keep the key rate at 21% per annum. Inflation accelerated significantly at the end of the year. The indicators of sustained inflation by the end of the year are high at 10%, which we certainly assess as an unpleasantly high level.
A day before the central bank leadership's discussion, there was a direct line with Putin where he expressed criticism about the possibility of raising the key or base rate. And accordingly, the Central Bank of Russia, complying with the political directive from above, rather than economic feasibility, which is very important, decided not to raise it.
Moreover, for the common people, the agenda is different. Everything is great, the economy is growing, sanctions are not working, and even the ruble has strengthened.
The Russian economy continues nevertheless to grow. Industrial growth in Russia has increased 4.5%. The manufacturing sector added 8.1%. Thank you. Machinery manufacturing, almost 20%. These figures indicate that enterprises are loaded with orders. The labor collectives are working faithfully and steadily. This is also confirmed by the situation in the labor market, unemployment in Russia. For the third consecutive month, it remains at a record low level. 2 and 0.4%, and therefore we with our request. We will resolve, yes, with some perhaps losses, but we will resolve it nonetheless. And those who do not want to cooperate with us, well, let them bear the consequences then.
But experts are sure that this won't last long, and within a few months, there will be an explosion in the Russian economy.
I think that by the end of spring, Russia will feel a shortage of a large number of goods that often came through imports. Import substitution in Russia does not work, and accordingly, Russia will have to purchase a large number of goods. This will be a big blow to the ruble. The ruble will return to 100 rubles per dollar, maybe even 105 or 110, and accordingly, inflation will increase.
You can lie as much as you want, but even logic suggests that it is impossible to improve the standard of living, income, and well-being while waging a war with billion-dollar expenses and millions in losses.
That's all for today. Subscribe, like, and watch other news in the new episode of Hotspot.